Hello and welcome to Tech Chairs, the Sports Tech podcast. I'm Rebecca Hopkins, CEO of the STHQ.
And I'm Alex Dibble, a sports broadcaster who's worked with tech startups in sport and other sectors.
This season is all about finances and failure. We're speaking to sports tech entrepreneurs about the financial journeys they and their companies have been on. The highs, the lows, and the lessons. We hope these conversations are valuable in helping other entrepreneurs and anyone thinking of taking the plunge avoid dangerous pitfalls and set themselves up for financial success.
This season of Tech Chairs is sponsored by Sports Tech HQ in Indiana. Sports Tech HQ, the home of sports, is building the largest cluster of sports technology companies in North America. In this industry, proximity matters. You want to be where the teams, leagues, and decision makers actually are. Indiana is home to dozens of sports organizations that rely on technology to run smarter, move faster, and stay competitive. Don't get lost in the noise. Build where the sports industry actually lives. Learn more at sthq.org.
Our guest for this episode is Myles Grote, a partner at the venture capital firm Elevate Ventures. Previously, Myles co-founded the company Upper Hand, a platform to help sports coaches organise, operate and streamline their businesses. Myles, thank you so much for joining us here today. I have to ask, what made you get involved in the sports sector as a place to practice entrepreneurship?
That's definitely an interesting question because I was always passionate about sports growing up, like playing and watching as a consumer. But I had no plans on going into the business of sport. And it was a call from my future business partner that had this idea. He had been coaching Little League out in Washington, D.C. And he had this idea or saw this like problem where parents were coming up to him. He was coaching Little League, but then he had parents asking him for like private lessons and whatnot. And so he said the whole process was just broken. And I was training for a marathon and I kind of hit a plateau in my training. And so I went to Google and I Googled, marathon coach Chicago when I was living there. And I saw no central location. This was in 2011, no central location to find sports coaches. And so when Kevin hit me with this call about this problem that he saw, I kind of had connected dots on my side too. And so that was how I kind of stumbled into it. And he and I ended up starting the company, which eventually became Upper Hand. But yeah, I had no plans in the beginning to ever go into the business of sports. It's kind of one of those serendipitous opportunities.
And we've spoken to a couple of founders who've said, I had a product, I had this great idea, I was really excited about it, and then I went to market with it and something just wasn't right. Like, it wasn't the product's fault, it might have been the market's fault, or I misunderstood it. When you took Upper Hand to market, was the take up, just as quick, just as great as you had hoped it would be, or was it actually, were there shaky stuff there?
No, it was shaky for sure. It was actually called Book a Coach when we first started. And we launched as a pure play marketplace to connect private sports coaches with parents and athletes. And we had interest, like we were able to kind of like connect the parent with the coach and they would transact. But then beyond that, we were having a hard time getting people to come back through and transact. And so it really was like a, true kind of marketplace, one transaction and done. The problem with that particular, with the economics around that is that for a marketplace to work, I mean, think Uber, right? Especially in bigger cities, people are hailing rides all the time, and there's a heavy volume of transactions per individual consumer. With sports coaching, there's not. Like, it's like one season you'll be looking for coaches and you find one, you transact once, and then you're off platform from there. So there just wasn't enough volume to really build a sustainable business. So we were able to get supply and demand together to transact, but we just weren't able to see the volume that we needed for the business to be sustainable. So that's when we ended up pivoting to what became Upper Hand, because we saw within the data that there were a subset of customers that were transacting often. And so we called them, picked up the phone, called them, said, hey, like, why are you using our product so many times and coming back and purchasing? And the parents were like, well, the coach is telling us to, they're forcing us to. So we called the coach. We're like, hey, why are you forcing the parents to do this? And we're like, well, because I run a facility and I have no software to run my business. And so, your product was the closest thing that solved our problems. And so, we're basically using it to manage all of our operations as much as we can. And so that was like the aha moment where we realized that the bigger opportunity was more in the brick and mortar sports facility space than it was in a pure play business to consumer app.
And at that moment, there was no part of you that was sort of holding on to the previous vision of what it could be. You were just fully like, well, this is what the market is telling us. We've got to move with it and we've got to do it fast.
I wish it was that clean, but it probably took us a full year to transition business models. I mean, we went through a rebranding process. We still tried to make both work. That was probably the biggest mistake that we made, is like didn't want to let go of the original vision. And so we were trying to like run two kind of parallel paths and two parallel businesses, if you will. It was like we had the marketplace, and then we had the business to consumer upper hand business model. And running both, especially when back then when you didn't have artificial intelligence to help streamline and increase productivity, you had to be really, really intentional about time allocation. And we were just trying to do too much with too small of a team. And so it took us about a year to transition fully to the new business model. But there was a moment where Kevin kind of pulled us all in the room, was like, we got to cut the marketplace, and we got to be all in on the sports facility model. And so took a long time, but we eventually got there.
What was that year like? What was the extra strain that it put on you and everyone else at the company? And also financially, did it end up harming the business in comparison to if you just switched a lot quicker?
Yeah, it set us back. It set us back primarily on how quickly we were able to develop and execute, like from a sales perspective. Because like the rebranding was not just like a new brand. We had to rebuild the product almost from the ground up. And so when we were straddling between the two models, it just like took away everything that every minute that we weren't spending on building the new facility software was a waste of time, because we ended up cutting it all anyway. So it set us behind on from a development standpoint, and it also set us back from a sales standpoint. And so once more competition started to come in, we were not nearly as far ahead as we should have been if we would have just cut the previous marketplace quicker.
And how was your decision making structured during that phase? Because on the one hand, you had a very exciting opportunity you'd identified and you were going for it. On the other hand, you were, if not quite plural, certainly dual. And you'd almost got double the set of challenges that most founders would be looking at. How did you manage that practically and financially? And one of the things that a lot of people have spoken to us about, which was an element we weren't expecting to discuss so much, was that emotional toll of being in the eye of the storm.
Yeah, the emotional toll is real, especially when you're so like me and my business partner are both like competitive. We did not want to quit. And so like there's a part of you that felt like you were quitting, and that takes a toll on you when you're a competitive person. So like
and that's interesting, because a lot of sports tech people have come from a sports world to begin with, where you have to be competitive. So
yeah,
do you have to almost unlearn that a little bit in that respect?
yeah, you have to. It's like competition and ego. I feel like there's like kind of like a lot of gray area between those two. Highly competitive people tend to have pretty big inflated egos. And so I think there's if you can separate between the two, competition and your ego, and you can really delineate and understand both and how they work within you, then you can really find a superpower there. The problem that we had was we let our egos bleed way too much into the competitive nature, and let our competitive nature drive our ego. And so that was a mistake. And I think that like when you're in your 20s, and you're entering in, because I was only 5 years in my career when we started this company. I think when you're that young, you have a tendency to have a bigger ego because you're trying to find your spot in this new world, right? And like going into a hyper competitive, entrepreneurial space where there's not a lot of capital to fund your business, it's easy to fall into those traps. And we were definitely not we were not special in that regard. We fell into the trap as well.
And but also then within that decision making process, you've got a partner, you've got somebody, to discuss these things through, to make decisions. Were there times when you were butting heads? Were there times when you were doubling down on your positivity? How did that work when you were deciding about which business you were going to back and which business you'd eventually shut?
Yeah, we butted heads a little bit at that point. I mean, that was like one of the first kind of forks in the road, if you will, where we really had to make a critical decision for the business, like red pill or blue pill. And I was definitely more keen to try to make the former business model work. And so like when I think back over the decade long run that we had starting and running this business and then eventually exiting it, that's one of the moments where I'm like, I made a mistake. Like Kevin was right and I was wrong on that particular area. So I'm glad that he stepped in and was just like, this is the way it's going to be. He was the CEO, so like he stepped in and was like, this is what we're doing. That I got a lot of respect for him that he made that decision. But there was definitely a little bit of friction there toward the end before we finally pulled the plug on the previous model. But we made it through.
And if you were giving advice to other people who are in that position whereby you've both got firmly held beliefs as to being right, how would you say to people that this is the way to be right, this is the way to be wrong?
Whew. Well, that's a tough one. Oh God, I forget who. I think it's a founder of Plaid. I forget his name. I think it's like Vlad something. I listened to a podcast that he hasn't done many podcasts. So I mean, you'll probably be able to find this pretty quickly if you search for it. But he talked about there's like you have conviction and knowledge of a particular situation. And so if someone approaches him in his company and says, ask him a question, which way, red pill or blue pill, he'll say, I have high conviction on this, but not a lot of knowledge, like on the topic. Or I've got low conviction, high knowledge. So there's an interesting dynamic there between conviction and knowledge of a situation. And so like for me, I've really like over the years, I think just like matured on that particular regard, where it's like if I don't have a lot of knowledge on a situation, it's hard for me to get a lot of conviction behind it. And so I kind of like know when to take my foot off the pedal on particular situations, and I'll tell the coworkers that I work with, like, don't know, like I think this is the right direction, but I have zero, very low conviction on in knowledge on why we should go that particular direction. So I think it's just kind of like knowing like when to put the pedal to the metal, and like typically that feeling kind of aligns and sides with high conviction and high knowledge in a particular area.
But in that moment where you're much younger and you're in, I imagine there might have been part of you thinking, no, I do feel like I know. I do feel like I've got the knowledge. And even though you might have been deceiving yourself, and of course it's a truism of life, not just in sports tech, that you don't know what you don't know. So if you're in that moment and you do feel like you know, and you've got the conviction, it must be really hard to then row back and allow somebody else's advice or vision to take over.
Yeah, I mean that's like that's a double-edged sword, I guess, like when you're younger, when you don't know, you don't know. Because like you're able to press through and push through walls that maybe you would look at in your older age and be like, that's a stupid wall to press through. But you press through the wall, and on the other side of it there's rainbows and pots of gold. And then maybe sometimes you push that wall and there's not. So I don't know. I when you're younger and you do you know less, you have less experience. Maybe it's a skill set that you still want to lean into it, which is you're young and ignorance is bliss. And I would, look at it opportunistically and maybe push through in those moments, regardless of your knowledge or conviction in the situation.
Because I was going to say, when you started peeling back the layers of the onion and entered the marketplace all in, we see an awful lot of booking software and platforms out there now, whether they are by sport or, they all seem to offer some niche solution, and there are a lot of them about. When you entered the market, did you become aware that you had more competition than you thought, or was it a surprisingly big gap that you were faced with once you started trading?
So when we first entered, we were really defining a category. There was no the most sophisticated software in the sports facility space was like like you would physically download the software to your computer, and it was like a scheduling software primarily, but there was no integration of like payments into the scheduling software. And so we saw that as an opportunity to build a cloud-based solution and kind of tie all the core elements, which the two primary elements were payments and scheduling, but there was also all this back office admin. But most of everything was done behind a desk. So you would walk up to the sports facility, you'd say, "Hey, I want to buy a lesson," and then the business would do all of that behind the scenes, behind the desk. And so there was no front end consuming facing like portion of the app, and so we saw that as an opportunity too. So when we first started, it was defining a category, and then like fast forward a couple years, and it was like super saturated, and we were, first the challenge was like convincing soft or these companies that like they needed a software to run on. They're like, I take cash and check, and like I just write everything down on this paper schedule. Like, why would I need a software to do this, right? So you had to, like, in a green pasture cell, you got to brute force and just like convince and sell on why they need the solution. And then once it becomes, a saturated market and there's more competition, then you have to start selling against competition. That's like the real challenge. We saw both of those, and man, it was a interesting transition once more competition started to come in. But now that whole market's completely saturated. You're right. I mean, it's insane how many solutions are out there, and it's only getting busier with the compression of, less resources you need to build software these days due to AI.
And with what you've gone on to do with Elevate Ventures, presumably you look at a lot of pitch decks and a lot of opportunities. What do you wish you know now that you'd known at the time you exited your business?
Um, yeah, there's a lot. That's why I'm really processing over here what the filtering through what maybe the top recommendation would be. I mean, I would probably just point to some of the biggest mistakes, and one of the biggest mistakes that we made, which was like we did not respect our cap table as much as we should have. And so as a result, when it came time to exit, there were serious implications for us as founders as it relates to the waterfall of the distributions from the exit. And so we see a lot of founders make a lot of mistakes, especially these days where safes are a very common mechanism for raising capital. Um, they're like in particular, there's a lot of times that founders will stack safes. They'll do a 5 million cap, 7 million cap, 10 million cap. They'll never clear out any of the safes by pricing the round and converting the safes into equity. And so what they end up with are blind spots. They don't really understand what they own with all these stacks and convertible instruments stacking on top of each other. So at the end of the run here, at the end of the race, they end up with far less than they thought that they had. And you get in really bad situations too, just from a motivation standpoint. And then investors will look at that and say, they know exactly what's coming down the pipe. There's going to be some sort of recapitalization where existing investors are going to get crammed down. And so they'll give you a silent no, or they'll tell you straight up, like, we're not stepping in because your cap table is a mess. You guys are too far diluted. You've raised too much capital at, too low valuations. And as a result, we can't do it. Because if we step in now, we know we're going to get crammed down in the next round. So respect your cap table, be very, very cognizant of where your equity is going, and just be super intentional on that front.
And you said that you didn't do that yourself, and therefore, what was the process like? Why? How much more difficult was it, and what were all the other trials and tribulations that came from that that you could have avoided?
I think it was just tougher to raise, and so when you actually need, there are businesses who don't really need venture capital, but if you actually do need venture capital, because it's expensive from a cost of capital perspective, you're giving up a lot of equity, right? Like versus going to a bank and getting a 5% loan, which a lot of startups can't do because they're risky businesses. But if you stack those sources of capital next to each other, venture capital is really expensive. So some businesses do not even really need it, and they think they do. But assuming you do, if you can't get access to it because you have cap table issues, that's a problem, because your competitors who were mindful of their cap tables, and who have clean cap tables and have maintained a really solid position within their company, from an equity standpoint, they're not going to have problem raising capital, all else equal. And so you're already losing on that front. The other piece of it too is just like control of the company. Like I think it's sometimes over indexed too, but a lot of times it's under indexed too as well. Like people just don't even realize the governance of their company and who really holds the cards. And the more equity you give up, the less you're going to be able to control how things are done at your company. You just continue to lose control of it. So that's another implication, is like, if you really do believe in yourself as a founder to take this thing to the house, that like starts to be muted. A messy cap table and losing control of your company is basically kryptonite to your skill sets to take it to the house.
When you look at prospects to back yourself, what are the things that get you most excited about them, in terms of whether it's structure or product, or the way they've actually, because there are almost two things you're investing in. One is the structure of the business and the people in the business, and the one is what they actually do, whether that's a product or a service. With the structure of the business, when do you come across people and think, oh, they've been smart, and when do you think, oh, guys, that was dumb?
I mean, usually, like, not to beat a dead horse here, but it's a lot of times you look at the cap table and you see like all the mistakes they made. A lot of times you'll see like deferred compensation stacking up on the balance sheet, where the founders have stopped taking the pay, but they're still booking it and want to be repaid. So that usually creates like a sticking point, or like a point of negotiation during closing, where it's like, all right, are you gonna what's the plan? We're like, you're not using our capital to pay yourselves back. Like, this is for new growth, and so we got to deal with this. So that's definitely like a point where they kind of shoot themselves in the foot. Um, I think you see like bad hiring decisions kind of like trickle through to execution. So like, for example, seeing like a really high burn rate with low growth tells me that the founder is just really not disciplined and not doing the hard things that they need to do in order for the business to succeed. So that could include, you've made bad hires and you need to get rid of these bad hires, or it's like you've hired people that you don't really need and you're running a bloated OpEx structure, and you're not seeing that translate through to revenue. So if that goes on for too long, I mean, that's like another huge red flag, where it's like, man, you've made some mistakes here and they're compounding. So the compounding effect of mistakes like early on is just so much more than like if it were a large company. It's just there's a magnifying glass on all elements of your business when you're so young and so early.
And how many of those did you yourself make, or did you make none of them?
Oh God, the hiring stuff. Oh, don't even get me started on this. Like I literally just wrote a piece last week called the hard four hardest lessons that I had to learn over my career. And one of them is families versus teams. Like when I was running Upper Hand, it was all about the Upper Hand family. Like, we're a family, blah blah blah. And it really does feel like you're a family when you're in that moment, because like it is so tight knit, and again, kind of going back to like you're young and you don't really know any better. But like I'm just like a very empathetic person. I always have been. Tremendous amount of empathy, and I think that empathy, like I let that get the best of me to like really think that this was like a family. But like when it comes down to it, the incentive alignment for companies has nothing to do with the family. It's not even close. Like if I hire someone and I'm throwing them the ball downfield and they keep on dropping it, like you're going to go on the bench in a start. You should go on the bench on a startup, and there is no bench on the startup. So you're fired, like you're off, like the team. Like there's just no. You can't have a mentality of a family, because a family is unwavering dedication to your family, right? Like there's always a spot on the bench for your family members. It does not matter if it's 10, 15, 20 years down the road. Like there's always a spot on the bench. It's not that way with startups, and it shouldn't be that way, because if you treat it like that, you're man. Like again, those mistakes are going to compound. Definitely made those mistakes. That one in particular, just the whole mentality of hire slow, fire fast. We definitely hired slow, but we did not fire fast, and that was a big mistake that we made.
I feel like I just want to ask you to repeat your article. Could you just read your whole article out? That'd be great. We've caught you at exactly the right time.
You can go Google that one and throw it into ChatGPT or something to get a quick summary.
And with growth, I mean, it's wonderful when people start a business, it starts to do well. But we've had conversations with people say, I just like doing startups. Get them to a point, then I like to go off and do the next one. And it is a different mentality when you move from startup to stay up to scale up to true growth. Were you very aware that you were having to behave differently as founders? And at what point did you think, right, this isn't right for me, I can be doing something that gets me more excited every morning than running this business?
It was probably about 9 years in. We had gone through an exit. So like our Series A lead was in 2018. It was like a family office that had a massive liquidity event to the tune of like 500 million plus, mainly going back to the family. And so they wanted to do a roll up of different, they called them integrated software vendors, which ISVs in the payment space is what they're known as. And so we were an ISV. So they wanted to do kind of like a roll up, and felt like they had a lot of skill set and connections to offer. And so they led our Series A. And then a year later, they offered to buy the cap table out. And so Elevate was actually one of the early investors in Upper Hand. They sold at that point, along with a lot of early angel investors. And it was really after that transaction happened, we didn't take anything off the table either. So like we were, it wasn't like we got some sort of like windfall of cash and I became unmotivated or something like that. Took zero off the table, kept on grinding. And it was like after that time frame, I realized that this was no longer my company. Like they had bought a strong majority of the company, and it just it felt different. There were definitely a lot of moments of friction there between the new investors and Kevin, my business partner, and myself, really with like the strategic direction of the company, a lot of like misalignment. And so, at some point I just realized that like there wasn't really a spot for me here to where I could like really add value like I had over the past 9 years. And so, I stepped away at that point, but it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. And it took several months for me to like really come to grips with like, I'm not quitting here. This is the right thing for me, my family, and the business. Like full stop. Everyone's going to be better off if I step away. And I honestly don't even know I don't know, like I've never even had that conversation with Kevin, like to like say like, was that the right move for the business? I have no, like we've never talked about it. Because once I left, I immediately went from Kevin and I had a business relationship to like, let's work on our friendship again. So that's like every time that we got together, I would never bring up business and rarely would ever talk about it. So I have no idea if it was the right thing for the business, but I was very confident at that point after several months of reflection on it that it was right for everyone involved, that everyone would be better off at that point.
We've spoken to people about that family professional life. Where is the boundary when you're a founder? And we've also spoken with you about the difference between being old and being older and young. So my question is, as you get older and you maybe start having a family or having children or whatever it might be, how do you judge and how do you adjust that boundary between family and professional life when doing it this way, living my professional life this way, is all you've ever done, and it seems to have kind of worked out so well so far? Wisdom. I need it.
Yeah. Um, my first point of advice on this topic is do never let your professional ambitions get in the way of you starting your family. There's never, like, just like starting a business, there's never going to be a perfect time to start a business. There's never going to be a perfect time to start your family. And I know that it can be like a daunting thought that, like, I'm gonna have to give up so much once I start having kids, but like once you have kids, you realize that there's nothing more important in this world than growing your family and investing time and being there for your family. So full stop, like that's the best possible advice I can give on the topic. In terms of the balance, I will say that every single human on this planet has 24 hours a day, right? When I was younger, I wasted a lot of time. And that's a relative statement. So like what does that mean? I just spent a lot of time on non-productive, I think, behaviors that I probably knew at the time, but like probably didn't appreciate the impact and the kind of compounding nature of those unproductive behaviors until later on in life. And so I spent most of my 30s really just paying down liabilities on my balance sheet from a personal perspective. And as I did that and started my family, the allocation of time, another piece that I wrote a couple of years ago called Optimize Time, it just, like, I'm way more effective. I have less time to focus on work these days, without a doubt, comparatively to my 20s and early 30s. But I, pound for pound, punch probably 10x the weight class that I did in the 20s. And it has nothing to do with AI either. This is just like pure, I'm at peace internally and I'm able to produce amazing work as a result of that. And there's several things that go into like how you find that peace, but without a doubt, starting a family has a big thing to do with that. I didn't realize how much I was missing until I went off and did that.
You've obviously got a lot of life experience from what you've done and the way you've gone around about developing your business, both building it and exiting it. When you see people come to you and say about what they're doing or what their ambitions are for the business or the way they behave, either within their own business or the marketing of their business or the development of their business, do you ever see and think, oh, another person is saying this to themselves and it's really not an effective way of being a boss?
Um, yeah, I think people, like, founders need to really need to understand intrinsically why they are building the company that they're building. When we first started Upper Hand, company culture was like becoming, it was like a hot topic at that point, and everyone had these big bold mission statements, and founders would say big bold things around those mission statements to motivate their staff. But I really question that time frame and whether that was an effective means of leadership. And the reason that I question that is, like, it seems so like extrinsically focused versus intrinsic, if extrinsic is even a word, but external focused, right? Like, so for me, I finally found my why. My, like, if I'm not building, I'm not happy. Like, it's just who I am. It's a part of my identity. It's a part of my DNA. Fourth generation Hoosier entrepreneur. when my family came, from Germany on the SSLB to New York, when they landed here, before they got here, when they landed here, they were entrepreneurs. And like, so I watched my parents start businesses and succeed and fail. And I loved it. Like I was like a kid and I was so passionate and interested about just like entrepreneurship and like finance in general, like the economics of things and how they work. And so I just know if I'm not building something, I'm not happy. And I think that founders make the mistake of like looking out at Elon Musk or whoever their CEO ambitions are, and they're like, I want to be that because like that person has a lot of money and a lot of success and a lot of clout. That is like the complete wrong reason to ever be doing something. Founding a company can be super hard if you don't have the right reasons driving you to build that company. And so I think that that's probably a really common mistake I see, is just like people doing it for the wrong reasons. And it takes a little while to figure out if it's for you. So I encourage people to go out and try to build stuff, because I think there's no better time to like build something and figure out if you like it. But do it for the right reasons and try to figure that out as early in your career as you possibly can.
I think that's probably a great note to leave this on. I mean, Myles, that was really fascinating. Thank you so much for your insights.
No, that was really great. So much stuff in there that I think other people will really, really value hearing. Yeah, I could list it, but then we'd be here for another 10 minutes. But yeah, I'm going to go. I'm going to find your article. Yeah. I'm going to read it all. I'm going to be a better person for it. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you for having me.
We hope you enjoyed that conversation with Myles, and that perhaps there are a few things that you might be able to put into practice as a result of it.
The STA Group exists to be the link between suits, tracksuits, lab coats and wallets. Thank you again to our sponsor, STHQ, and thank you for listening. Goodbye.
Goodbye.